And Nick may have been training, doing more, and feeling wrecked than was optimal for him at some point in
Yeah.
time. He's still making progress, but he was just wasn't making optimal progress. His progress could have been better, or at least now for sure, his progress would be nil or be minimal or less than it currently is, as he's apparently seeing. And he's optimizing because he trained so hard anyway by
Yeah.
having more reps in reserve, getting in more volume, and he still creates. He's obviously Nick's got pretty good genetics, I think, for bodybuilding. His personal muscle genetic code is such that resistance exercise creates hypertrophy. Like it just he puts that in. It's like gas to a fire, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's going to happen, and then someone else maybe who's less genetically gifted in that sense, they may need to cultivate the signal more with more sets taken to failure in order to
Uh-huh.
get a signal whatsoever. But then that means that they can't do as many sets because you can't recover from as many sets when you're training to failure all the time.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally, and all of our programming, well, it's brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. Use our code Think over there for additional savings. I just got another bag of the cookie butter whey isolate, the cold filter whey isolate. I love that freaking flavor. Use code Think over there for all your basic bodybuilding supplements. Get some additional savings, 10% off, plus help to support our programming. We're brought to you by Scott's book, BYOBBcoach.com. That's Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. You can get the hardcover linked in the description, and Scott will sign it for you, or you can get the ebook at the website. We'll have both of those options down below. Of course, we have timestamps down below. Check that out. And if you are new to our content, then definitely we'd love to have you along for everything. We have several shows that come out each week. So like, share, subscribe, comment, and as Dusty would say, definitely ring the bell. And last but not least, supplementsource.ca for Canadians and Patreon. Thank you guys for all your support over there. We try to tackle all your Patreon questions. Scott, we started out with no plans for the show as of yesterday. And
Yeah,
now we have so many plans for the show that we are not going to be able to do it all in one episode,
not
are
a
we?
chance. No way. Not even
Yeah.
close.
We got a lot
I
of
wish
stuff. And
there were worse
I,
problems.
I'm excited for this. So years back, I remember it was literally like several years, maybe 5 years ago.
Mhm.
We did an episode about squeezing the muscle. This past week, we did a reaction to a Nick Walker training video, and he talked about how he's found this additional benefit in squeezing the muscle. I know you've got the clip there. Let's let the people hear that.
All
And
right.
I know you've got a lot to say on this topic.
Okay, here we go.
I love this. Scott's in charge of the tech stuff today.
All right. Should I make that any larger or is it good
That's
enough?
fine. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Like I've grown the best. I've stayed around her, and I think anyone can say whatever they want. It creates detail. Yeah, that's where
Okay, I think I need to go back a little bit
Yeah,
here.
just a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, it does a lot.
you have to.
Yeah.
Legs is always high rep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is good.
Like, you get any leg exercise, no less than 10.
Okay.
I stay around 12, 15,
12, 15, sweet spot. Yeah.
no matter what it is. I just feel like I feel like I've grown the best. I've stayed around her, and I think anyone can say whatever they want. It creates detail.
Yeah.
That's where even with the whole science bullshit. Science says squeezing the muscle doesn't bring out detail. I call bullshit. It's where
Look
the
at
end
him,
of
size.
prep,
Yeah,
literally at 4 to 5 weeks out.
I think that's it.
Well,
I think
let
that's
that,
what I
let
want
that
to
go
get.
for just a second
Oh,
because there's a little bit more.
okay, here we go.
Yeah.
It was 6, maybe. Basically, when I got back to Jersey, I stopped worrying so much about how much weight I was doing, and I would just keep the negative, but I would just fucking squeeze.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, my back is so detailed to the core.
Yeah.
And then you see Derek, who's in shape, he's conditioned,
Uh-huh.
not as much detail as mine.
I like that.
That
And I
was it
think
right
that
there. A
Yeah,
little
okay.
does
dig at
result
Derek on
in
top of
squeezing
it.
the muscle.
Right. Those guys are always. They did a photo shoot with Samson
Yeah.
like 2 years ago, like in the few days after the Olympia, and they were kind of having at it. There was an exchange there that people could probably look up, and they were
Okay.
just kind of having at one another. Um,
Yeah.
so I think we can go back here.
All right. Yeah. Hell
All
yeah,
right.
man. So Yeah, I thought back because we did an episode, man, and like I said, I think it was like 5 years ago now, where we talked about this, and I know that you had a study talking about some people that were squeezing the muscle versus training with traditional reps, and they weren't even using any weight. They were literally just like
Yeah.
squeezing the muscle. I would love to hear you go back into this and see what else you have to say.
Yeah, it's the no load study. Counts et al. From it's like 5 or 6 years old now. Maybe 2018. I could look it up, but people can find it if they want. Obviously, I rarely get these inquiries, but if you want, I'll send you the reference. Just let me know. Um, and they basically compared traditional resistance training. This is just for the elbow flexors with just doing a contraction. I think it was a maximal contraction where they just moved, extended, and flexed at the elbow against no load. And
Yeah.
they got strength gains in the traditional group and literally nothing in the squeeze group, we'll call it the no load training. But the muscle growth was equivalent in those two conditions.
So they got no
And
strength gains in the squeeze
yeah,
group, but the
right.
muscle was just as big as the guys who did get strength gains and did traditional reps.
They got
Wow.
the same hypertrophic effect. So, or muscle increase effect. We don't know what happened. I don't imagine there's any hyperplasia involved, but I avoid that term muscle hypertrophy sometimes.
Hmm.
So it's just kind of what you'd expect. They did not train against the load, right? They weren't imagining. There's actual studies where people just do visualization of training against the load, and you can get strength gains that way. But in this case, they were doing something non-specific to training against the load, where you would
Yeah.
expect some strength gains. They didn't get the strength gains, so that's not a big deal. The interesting thing there, and I mentioned this study last week on a podcast. It comes up. Maybe it was a couple weeks ago on a different podcast. Is if you can produce, at least this gives us some evidence that just contracting a muscle as it's lengthening and shortening against zero load. So if you have a scenario, let's say, where you just have picked out the completely wrong exercise for training a given portion of a muscle, let's say it's the back. He mentioned back, so it's the lower lats. But you
Yeah.
have a really good mind muscle connection with your lower lats. You've done a lot of posing. You can sit there. The listeners can probably do this. I can sit here and contract my lower lats. I can just make the muscle move because years of you're doing it,
Yeah.
years of
Right
posing.
now.
Yeah, and that can be taught. So, and the mind muscle connection is something that's been investigated. Um, there's actually a study from Brad Schoenhill where they had an internal locus of focus or internal focus versus
Okay.
external moving the load. And with the internal focus, they actually had better muscle growth, I think, just in the upper body. It was one of the two muscles they studied,
Huh.
and otherwise it was equivalent. So it's just focusing internally, in this case, just contracting a part of a muscle, even though biomechanically it might not be getting an optimal external load against which it would be contracting, can create a hypertrophic stimulus, as the study shows. So, there is something to say for a mind muscle connection. There's something to say for squeezing the muscle because it's being activated, even if it's a really light load. And the thing he talked about, light load training with his legs, this all kind of fits together. And this is the thing is these ideas are actually, there's not just bro bullshit. I mean, I don't think Nick was thinking of these studies when he made that. He's thinking of his personal experience, right?
Right. Right.
And that of many other people. There's an old video from one of the Battle for the Olympias with Milos Starcev, and he had totally switched it up. He's like, I think he's maybe in his peak week, or he's very close to being on stage, and he's just all he's talking about is just squeeze, 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 and he's training super light and squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. And he was turned on to this idea. So this has actually been tested. This sort of thing has been tested in the literature, and I'll pull up a screen capture here to show this, where they've trained their subjects with lighter loads and made sure to keep tension on the muscle continuously,
Right.
as opposed to heavier training where people might have a pause, or you get to the full end of the range of motion. Let's see, you get the last 10, 15 degrees of knee extension on a squat. You're not really getting any quad activation, right? If you even think that squats are good for your quads, I tend to think that they can have some effect, especially if you go deep. But in this particular series, and I'll show the authors here in just a second, they've actually shown that training lighter with intentionally maintaining continuous tension by
Yeah.
not locking out, and uh, you see some people who have really strong benches, bodybuilders, avoid a lockout on their pecs all the
Yeah.
time. And you see, I mean, you're just associating empirically, anecdotally, guys who do that, who also have good pecs. Maybe they're training more in the stretch position, what have you, but they're maintaining tension. They call this training without relaxation in between, because that's essentially what you can get, especially if you have to have some fibers that are being turned off, some motor units being turned off to match the loading curve of the exercise. So if you get to the end of an exercise where it's lighter and it's easier, if you just maintain the activity of all those motor units that were active earlier on when it was necessary to move the weight, you would just blast into almost a hyperextension. It would be uncontrolled. You just like fly into a lockout at your knee,
Yeah.
which would not be a good thing. So although the whole muscle might not be completely relaxing, although you can do that, you can lock your knees out on a squat. Not a good idea to do that for prolonged periods. But there's some relaxation of the fibers. And when they created conditions where that doesn't happen, where there's continuous tension or flexing, so to speak, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's a related type of idea. You see an interesting thing. It's lighter load training without the relaxation, and you get fiber type specific hypertrophy in the limited studies they've done. And I'll show this here just briefly, just a sec. So Natreba is the first name on many of these studies. Let's see if it shows it here. You can see this
Mm-hmm.
on the bottom. Let me go to the first page. So Natreba has been the first name on some of these, Popov and then Vinogradova. This is a nice kind of review with a study built in. And I'll just go to the results here because it's fairly complicated. They really went all in on this. But what we have here is regular leg extension type of training, L groups, knee extension, these were on an isokinetic device that they set up in isotonic mode. So you can set up an isokinetic lab or rehab device to behave as if it were a free weight. And then here they did the isokinetic, or sorry, the regular leg extension, the real free weights with a little bit of a more moderate load here, a little bit higher actually in both cases. So we have C for control, regular training, and E means there was no relaxation. So they were continually contracting without resting so they shortened the range of motion to some degree. And the workloads were different. We can slide across this table here. The 1 rep maxes were greater in the heavier training, at least in this particular group. And then what you see here, and this is the interesting part, this is the area of the type 1 muscle fibers, muscle fiber type 1, MFI, and type 2 muscle fibers, right? And we see here with the control regular training, 80% of 1 rep max. This is regular 8 to 12 rep max training. They got what you oftentimes see, in this case, 23.4 versus 9.4 percent increases in type 2 versus type 1 muscle fibers. So there's more growth in the type 2s, what you typically see. When they drop the load down, so this is what made me think of this. When you sent the clip that Nick was talking about, those last 6 weeks, he stopped worrying about his loads. He's squeezing, he's maintaining tension. He's not just neglecting the eccentric. He also noted that, which is important, I think.
Yeah.
And he's probably was using lighter loads. He went back to New Jersey, new gym, but using lighter loads. And I don't think he's going to lose in those 6 weeks going to lose any type 1 fiber, or sorry, type 2 fiber. But when you just train that way, we see an interesting pattern here. So this is the type 1 fiber increases versus type 2 fiber. You get, when you train in this way with the lighter loads, at least in this experimental design, you get greater relative increases than type 1 fibers versus the type 2. Okay. Now this is 8.2 pales in comparison to 23. This is what you get. 23 is, in this case, what you get from traditional without trying to avoid the relaxation. So you definitely would take 23 over 8.2 for sure.
Yeah.
But maintaining the tension produced better type 1 fiber growth. So this speaks to the potential for various things. Train perhaps heavier and try to keep that mind muscle connection going at the same time where you're contracting, which you can do. You'd have to have co-contractions to balance out the torques about the joint, but you can maintain and squeeze the muscle throughout the course of a range of motion. Even when you're training heavier, it's much easier to do a course to control the weight and those sorts of things when it's lighter. And plus, when you're training heavy, you're going to activate those fibers anyway. You're going to need to. But what this suggests is that maintaining, this is somewhat of a stretch from a purely scientific perspective, somewhat of a stretch, but maintaining muscle tension, this is going to create metabolic stress, which will affect then the fiber type recruitment patterns that you have. It has a multitude of effects. Metabolic stress does play a role in the way in which the motor units and the fibers become activated.
Okay.
But you can evoke a type 1 specific increase in fiber size, training with this no relaxation type of strategy in place. So this was the leg extension. You see the same pattern here. So like when they are on the isokinetic device, traditional, regular, not worrying about that. Type 2 fibers grew better, 19.4 versus 6.5. But when we didn't allow the muscle to relax and we maintained tension throughout, it's 17.7 versus 6.5 for the type 1s. And the type 2s didn't grow very well. So we get a reversal of the relative changes in type 1 versus type 2 fibers.
Huh.
So that squeezing thing is going to be something that is going to preferentially activate and hypertrophy the type 1 fibers. This is one of the reasons, this kind of evidence is one of the reasons why Brad Schoenfeld initially hypothesized that metabolic stress is important for muscle growth. Because this is a more metabolically stressful scenario here. Actually, if you look at it, the workload is about half in each of these. If you look at how much they were doing, so they're not actually doing as much. It would be interesting to see what would happen if they equated this. And that's kind of what they did here, but they also changed the loads. But this suggests that metabolically stressful activity could potentially be, it definitely changes the motor unit activation strategies. That's part of Henneman's size principle. That's part of muscle wisdom. There's type 3 and type 4 afferents in the muscle that sense this metabolic stress feedback to the spinal cord and then alter the recruitment according to Henneman's size principle so that you can keep doing things, right? If you create fatigue with metabolic stress, there has to be some adaptation in order to keep doing the reps. If not, you would just come to a grinding halt and you'd just be staring at your muscles saying, what are you doing? It's not what I want.
Yeah.
So you can get this reversal. Interestingly enough, here they still found it when they increased to 65% of a 1 rep max. So more moderate load versus 85, really heavy. They still saw the same thing. So the really heavy stuff definitely went up. 33% increase in type 2 fiber cross-sectional area. Not much in the type 1 with the really heavy stuff, but the lighter stuff got after the type 1s, much more so than the type 2s. So there's a pattern over all three of these different conditions, whether you're really with free weights, you're on an isokinetic machine, or whether you're training a little bit heavier in both cases. You see the heavy training focuses on type 2 fiber growth. The lighter stuff goes to type 1. Now, someone else might have known that this played a role when he decided that Widowmakers would make sense for people to do.
Okay. Yeah.
Good old Dante. That high rep stuff does work in some cases.
Yeah.
There is a study from Carniera with postmenopausal women. It's sort of the one study we have that's looked at this, comparing. They did a crossover study, high load versus low load, 12 weeks under each condition, and they had, of course, some people who responded better, really well at a high load. Some people responded really good at low load, and then some who didn't. When they crossed over, so they spent 12 weeks at either high load training or low load training, leg
Mhm.
based training. I think they took a week or two sort of break, washout period. May have been between semesters. Happens sometimes when these weren't students in this case, but sometimes the researchers need to leave too.
Yeah.
Everything kind of shuts down at the school. Um, they switched over then. The high load went to low load, and the low went to high load. Those people who were non-responders or minimal responders to either of those conditions had better responses.
Hmm.
Second half of the study when they changed from high load to low load or low load to high load,
Okay.
which suggests then that there may, because you would expect like we talked about a couple podcasts back, this law of diminishing returns would suggest that in that second 12-week period you wouldn't see the same gains. They would be less in general because you had your newbie gains. You might expect that. The fact that gains took off for those who didn't fare so well initially,
Yeah.
whereas those who did do well did see a law of diminishing returns when they
Okay.
bifurcated their data, suggests that some people do better with light loads and some people do better with heavier loads. That could be because they have relatively more type 1 fibers.
Hmm.
Right? So if you train with lighter loads, and that tends to get the type 1 fibers, and that's light versus heavy is a little bit of a different situation. There's a study from Morton from 2016. They saw no difference in the relative hypertrophy of those two. These studies are using a different approach. They're maintaining tension during the set, which is exactly what I have people do during pump sets of fortitude training for what it's worth. And this was something that was part of that thinking when I came up with those, because you're there's no relaxation. You don't do them like Widowmakers are badass. Trust me, like those can be game changers for people. But this approach with lighter weights, maintaining tension, is something that may be better for certain people, especially if they just have a lot of type 1 fibers. So one more thing I'll connect the dots on here too. These are just all the thoughts that float around. I'm pulling from the thought cloud in my head here.
Okay.
Put these down. So Nick talked about higher reps for legs too. So
Yeah, he did.
yeah, so it's interesting. He touched on a ton of shit there, all in that short little clip. Let me take this down here so I can see you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't need that anymore. So, for instance, from the aging literature, you see that there's a preferential loss of type 2 fibers, and in general atrophy in the lower limbs compared to the upper limbs.
Ooh.
Right? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Why?
And,
Yeah. Older
yeah,
guys' legs shrink. That's what we
yeah,
hear.
you see that in the bodybuilding world too. Yeah, I'm just talking about the average person, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And
Yeah.
that could be a lot of things, but that does tend to happen. I think knee pain can be part
Ah.
of, like, people just don't train as heavy. You're not doing 500-pound squats when you're 62 years old in most
Yeah.
cases. But it seems like that hints at different use patterns during the day, and the possibility that and what happens also as older folks are getting older is their mobility goes down. So the change in what's happening to their legs, legs are seeing on a day-to-day basis, is greater in the lower body versus the upper body. Most people aren't moving around doing things. Maybe they're typing, but they're not doing push-ups. They're not doing highly strenuous things. They've got a very different um, loading history in the upper body versus the lower body. So
Yeah.
the lower body, when you stop using it and you stop doing that high rep, continuous, um, static as opposed to phasic. So phasic activity is, it comes in phases. Every once in a while you got to pick up something heavy and move it with your arms, right? Or push someone away from you, or pull on something that's heavy, what have you. But with your legs, it's more of a tonic type of activity. Those aren't tone muscles, they're not postural muscles, but they're staying active. You're walking, you're moving around. we were basically, as bipeds, that we're ambulatory, with the idea that we're hunters and gatherers, and we'd be walking around. So there's various pieces that kind of point to the idea that a lower load type of stimulus could be a good way to preserve lower body muscle mass. And you can do this. The blood flow restriction studies are amazing. They just do blood flow restriction and have older people walk on a treadmill, and they get muscle growth just from blood flow restriction added to the treadmill walking. So the fact that Nick says that his legs stay full and he has a good response from training with higher reps with legs, which bodybuilders have been saying for decades now,
Right.
isn't surprising to me when you look at what the research suggests in terms of those muscles losing size when they don't receive high rep activity of walking around, as opposed to the upper body doesn't lose size, because it's not seeing much of a change, and it's normally very phasic, intermittent type of activity. So it's very possible, not for everyone, depends on your fiber type percentages, that higher rep stuff is going to be a better option for the lower body. People have seen this for years with calves many times, and bodybuilders have typically said this with legs as well. And Nick is reminding us that that is the case for him too. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that and the other thing too, he's probably doing some cardio, but people get a little bit lazy sometimes during their prep too. They don't move around and they're not as active. So doing higher reps is, based on what we just saw, is going to be maybe a better way to target those type 1s and keep them from dropping in size. If they don't receive the daily activity they normally would, because you're spending more time napping and conserving your energy.
Yeah.
You're on a diet.
Got a question for you.
Yes.
Can you please explain the just difference in real world, between type 1 and
Oh, yeah.
type 2?
Okay, so I got a really old video on YouTube that we could maybe link or something. I'll send it to you. I was
Okay.
sitting out by my pool, and I was using the dry erase board. I still
Oh,
get
I
comments.
remember seeing some of those. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's different ways. This is a kind of you're asking a muscle biologist here to tell you about fiber types. So goody, I get to talk about my favorite topic, right? Here comes the geek. So there's different ways of typing muscle fibers, of figuring out what type they have. What we tend to see is, and this is really sort of an overgeneralization to compartmentalize muscles, muscle fibers, and say they're either this or that, because they're not necessarily. Initially, you'll hear people talk about red fibers and white fibers, right?
Yeah.
That's a really, really antiquated term that you won't even hear mentioned in textbooks unless they explain that comes from research in rodents. Rabbits are like this. Birds are like this, and birds are like this in particular. That's why you have white meat and dark meat in birds. So the dark meat is the stuff is that they would use a lot. It has lots of fat in it. It's dark because it has more myoglobin. So you have some fibers that are more endurance oriented. Those would be the red ones in rodents or birds, and then you have some fibers that are not so endurance oriented. Those are white. They don't have the capillarization. They don't have the myoglobin. That's an old antiquated term. People still use red and white. I just heard it the other day on a video. But what has been done for 40 years or more is they initially looked at the type of myosin ATPase, which tells you which is associated with how fast the muscle fibers contract. So all of this is basically, it's not exactly this, but it's basically to match how muscles get used under varying circumstances, depending on where they are in the body. So when we'll go right into the resistance exercise. When you pick up a very light load, let's say you're picking up the pink dumbbells to hand them over to somebody to give him shit, right? And you start curling them, right? Easy. The Henneman size principle will tell you that the low threshold motor units will be activated first. Those are associated with fibers that would be called type 1.
Okay.
When you look at those, you can see if you just did a bunch of reps like that and you then took the whole muscle out or biopsied the muscle, you'd see, okay, we only see glycogen that's gone in the type 1s. Only the type 1s got activated. If you isolated the nerve with the light, easy stuff, you'd see only those neurons that go to what are the type 1 fibers, the low threshold motor unit fibers, are activated. So type 1s are your endurance oriented, sort of first gear, light load, easy effort types of stuff. And then as things progress in terms of effort or the weight gets heavier, you have to call on fibers that have a different kind of myosin, type 2, just breaking it down into two different scenarios. There's another classification system where they have 7 fiber types.
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah, most of the time people would just go with 3, type 1 and type 2, and then there's 2 subtypes, type 2A and type 2X.
Okay.
Ooh, that was it last podcast. I showed some data from Sterin et al. From 1990, and they talked about type 2A and type 2B. That's the old way of naming these fibers in humans. They found something out that humans and rats don't share the same myosin. So myosin is one part of the actin and myosin in sarcomeres that allows the sarcomeres to shorten, contract, produce force. So you've got fibers that would be type 1. They have a certain myosin ATPase, so they can break down ATP only at a slower rate, but they don't need to do it any differently because they're endurance oriented. There's not
Yeah.
huge power output demands from those fibers typically in terms of lifting heavy loads or do anything extremely effortful. Eventually, or if you just start off doing something like sprinting that's harder, you're going to need to call on those type 2s. The type 2As would be first, and then if it's an all-out effort, the type 2Xs would be called upon. And those are sort of your last gear that most people don't really tap into much at all. Those are the ones that basically disappear in older folks. You don't really see those because they don't get used. You don't use it, you lose it.
Are we using them as bodybuilders if we're pushing to hard failure?
Here's the interesting thing. Yeah, so there's some the data is somewhat equivocal on this, but mostly it's kind of a cool story actually. Mostly what you find in most studies is that, and we saw this in the Sterin study actually, I mentioned I think in the podcast, is those 2Xs, they were called 2B in that study. When you start using them, that's registered in the cell nucleus, that's registered because there's metabolic stress there, and then they will start producing different myosin that's more efficient because they're seeing a repeated stimulus, and it makes more sense to have the type 2A myosin as opposed to the type 2X myosin. So if you, I'll tell you the story. I think you might have told it before here, but when I was in grad school, I did a bunch of assisted with muscle biopsies. I did a whole bunch of them myself, and we analyzed the fibers, right? If you activate a type 2X fiber enough and train it, it becomes a type 2A. So what you see in most training studies is the 2X percentage of 2X goes down. People say,
Okay.
look how much the 2X's grew. It's like, yeah, but it was like 0.7% of the total fiber area. They vanish. So we had this biopsy from my muscle. This was in like probably 98 or something like that. And there were hundreds and hundreds of fibers there, and I had one type 2X fiber. I'm like, damn, I didn't get that fiber. I've been holding back. So there probably was just a few of them scattered that hadn't yet converted, right?
Okay.
So yeah, you do activate type 2Xs when you start off, maybe from a layoff, but eventually if you use them enough, in most studies they go away.
Okay.
There are some studies. There's like an Italian group that showed more of those than you would expect from many of the studies. So I had the sense that people were training high volume, once a week, bro split types of things, pro split, Jay Cutler style training, like a lot of bodybuilders do. It works for a lot of people. They probably are going to have very, very few of those type 2Xs.
Okay.
Because the type 2As are a little more endurance oriented. They're a little more economical at the contraction speeds you see during resistance exercise. Now, if you're training heavier, there's actually a few studies you can show an increase in type 2Xs. If you train at really high velocities
Hmm.
or really high efforts, you can do it with electrical stimulation. There's some possibility even that the type 1s will become type 2s.
Hmm.
But
Oh,
you have to train with power training in mind. So someone, I wouldn't be surprised if a power lifter who maybe started off with an endurance exercise background, or which they maybe weren't very good at, what have you, and they just went to just powerlifting, heavy stuff, infrequent, and actually their overall activity levels went down, that they could have more type 2Xs over time.
okay.
Um, it's funny, you see like endurance athletes, um, when they detrain, their fibers will get bigger. Some studies.
Really?
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. It's not an advantage for fibers to be really large if they're exposed to endurance exercise performance, because that means they have a large. This is the theory, at least. They have a larger diffusion distance, so they need to get oxygen in, and then to get those metabolic stress byproducts out. And they
Okay.
need to have lots of capillaries to get the blood through there. They need to have good blood flow. They need to do gaseous exchange and metabolite exchange. And having a ginormous fiber does not help in that regard. Um, so, but when they stop, so the adaptation then would be to shrink the fibers, right? And sometimes there's really kind of cool. There's studies that show all sorts of different variants in how the muscle can adapt. The plasticity is tremendous. But when you detrain endurance athletes, their fibers will sometimes get bigger, and their vertical jump will double.
Hmm.
They have like an 8-inch vertical leap, and then they'll go to like 16 inches. So detraining for them shifts them towards um, more type 2 and or larger fibers. So an untrained muscle has potentially lots of 2x depending on your genetics. And then when you train it, most of the time the 2x's become 2A's.
Okay. Can I
Yeah.
circle all the way back around to the beginning then? So
Mm.
the first thing we were talking about, squeezing the muscle versus training with 10 to 12 reps to failure. Both produced results. Did they produce results in different fibers?
Yeah, I can pull that up again. Now
Okay.
you got better background. I'll pull it back up and we can look at
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
It's right here. So yeah, this is the cool part. Um, so just look here at these two lines.
Right.
So C is control, and this is leg extensions, and E is no relaxation. Okay, so they trained 50% of a 1 rep max really light, and they
Right.
continuous tension, as opposed to you just train 80% 1 rep max and you train heavy, and they didn't worry about trying to do a squeeze or anything like that. This is as close to doing a squeeze as I know of in the research literature, because they're
Okay.
maintaining tension throughout, right?
Okay.
And they set up the repetitions and the tempo and the range of motion so that they use the Weider continuous tension principle. I'm sure there's a Weider continuous tension principle. He named everything he could. Like, that's a Weider principle.
Yeah.
Um, and what we see here is that with the standard basic heavy training, not worrying about a squeeze, 23% increase in type 2 fibers. That's here.
Hmm.
And only 9 in the type 1 fibers.
Okay, and
Whereas
that was with the heavy weight, so
that's
you
what
gained a lot more
mm-hmm.
size in the type 2 fiber. Okay, I'm following you.
Yeah, and that's what you see. It's not always the case, but that's what you typically see in your standard resistance exercise training study, where they train like this, 80% of a 1 rep max. People will say it's not wrong to say this, but the because generally we actually see this here, mathematically at least, that the type 2s have a greater potential for muscle growth.
Yeah.
That's the notion, and that seems to be the case. So in this case, 23% the type 2s, 9% the type 1s with the heavy training. Whereas with the lighter training, 18% basically, 17.7 versus 8.2. So the type 1s grew more.
A
You
lot
can see
more.
when I highlight this, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. Um, so yeah, with the lighter, and this, if you look at the um, other conditions they had, control, squeeze, we'll call it,
Yeah.
the different machine and a little bit heavier loads, you seem to see the same pattern in the control.
Yeah.
Type 2 fiber increases are greater than type 1, but when you add the squeeze, you reverse that pattern. So there's
Okay.
a preferential fiber type hypertrophy that comes from training in one way versus the other.
Okay.
Adding the
I've
squeeze
got a
gets
follow up then. I've
yes,
got a
yes,
follow up. Can we do both? Can we, I mean, obviously not in
absolutely.
the same set, but can we do both to try to grow all the fibers?
Well, of course, that's what fortitude training does.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard John
That's what
Meadows talk
Widowmaker.
about that too. You know, he was like, well, I don't just want to grow. How about we grow all of them? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what Jordan Peters has talked about this. Get stronger in all the rep ranges.
Yeah.
Get better
Okay.
in all the rep ranges. So the lower rep or the lower reps would tend to be the heavier weight would tend to get the type twos. The lower reps, the lighter weight, or the higher reps, the lower weight would tend to get the type ones.
And as you
Generally,
pointed out as well from a different study, that maybe you'll respond better to the higher reps, maybe you'll respond better to the low reps. But if you do them all, you're gonna get it all. You'll get everything you can at
you're
least.
covering all your bases is kind of
Yeah.
the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So don't
Uh,
just do just one thing. Like
yeah.
heavyweight is great. Heavyweight for,
Right.
as many reps as you can get is great. But
Hmm.
then higher reps for as many reps as you get, or higher weight for lighter weight for as higher reps as you can get is also great.
Yeah. And like another thing kind of popped up in my head is one of the things Dante has said is he calls it get funky with it.
Okay.
And for people who have weak muscle groups that don't seem to want to grow, we've talked about this too. This isn't going to be everyone, but one potential reason for that is they don't have a good mind muscle connection, right?
Yeah.
They're not someone who can go and pick a suboptimal exercise, let's say, and contract it like in the count study and just create flex the muscle, so to speak, squeeze the muscle, even though it's not contributing to moving the load and create a hypertrophic effect from that because they just know how to contract the muscle. They can make their lat work, just like you and your calves, right? Your
Yeah.
calves just wanted to be activated, right? And
Yeah.
you see the video, you're doing side laterals and you're
And
up
the
on your
calves are
tippy
all,
toes. Yeah.
yeah.
So your calves are just, and I think maybe we talk about leg pressing, your calves just want to be activated. There's something about your biomechanics, neurologically, what have you. Your calves just get activated. They're obviously not a weak muscle group on you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Other way around, some people who maybe don't have that mind muscle connection have learned how to do it. Don't get growth from the standard exercises, even if they're not biomechanically optimal. The loading curve is off, or the angle is off, or what have you, and they can't figure out a good way to execute where they're getting that muscle involved because of how they're doing it. They don't have a good mind muscle connection. That's when Dante's strategy of getting funky with it is finding an exercise where biomechanically you have no choice whatsoever but to activate the muscle in isolation the way you're intending,
Yeah.
and that it's activated in the lengthened position in a way that it wouldn't otherwise be. You can't like do squats where you're getting like minimal loading on your quads in the last third of the range of motion. You're going to have to do an exercise like a sissy squat of some sort, where you're leaning way back, or you're going to have to do knee extensions where you got a load. Like I have a standard like just free weight knee extension. So it's heaviest at the very end, right?
Oh,
I have
okay.
I have the bench back like tipped up like this. So
Yeah.
there's load at the beginning, as opposed to if it's just hanging like this, there's no load at the beginning. You get to here and you got maximal load.
Wow. Okay.
So I have the whole bench up like this, so it starts there, and it's
Ah,
loaded at the bottom a little bit, and then it's you got a decent load at the top too. So you're gonna have to get funky with it. Find exercises that basically give you no biomechanical neurological option other than to activate that muscle, because you're not good at doing it yourself in the way someone with a good mind muscle who has that. I consider it kind of a form of athleticism
yeah.
way in the context of bodybuilding, is like how to get the muscle activated when you're doing exercises that would use it. Um, that's why that study was a good study for them to do with the no load training, is they did the elbow flexors, the biceps brachii, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Because look, you can see it, right? Unlike your back, and you can feel it. And most people, that's just one that, I can, it's my make a muscle. People do this, right?
Right.
So everyone can see their biceps. They can touch it. They can feel it. It's a really easy one to create a mind muscle connection on.
Yeah.
As opposed to if they tried that same study and said, hey, I want you to contract your lower lat and go through a range of motion like this and keep it contracted. This is what,
Yeah.
I don't think it would work.
Yeah.
Right.
I could totally see that.
So that goes to the point is like those muscles that you just can't easily activate with a good mind muscle connection. You can't maintain tension. You tend to call in accessory muscles or what have you. Then you're going to have to do what Dante said and get funky with it and give the muscle no other choice and find the exercise that just completely exploits that muscle biomechanically. So
Yeah.
it has to be used. I'll tell you one last, this is kind of related. It's the funny thing that popped in my head. I had years ago when I was in grad school in Texas, I trained people like really early in the morning, and a young guy came in, and I think he hired me initially, and then he wanted his dad to train. So he was taking over his dad's construction company, and his dad had done construction work his entire life. And now he's retired, and I think he was starting to gain some weight. He wasn't active, wasn't doing all the stuff he used to do. And he's looking after his dad. Like, let's get you in the gym, Dad, and keep you healthy, blah, blah. So I'm just showing him the ropes. We're just showing exercises. The young guy knew some things. The dad had no clue about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, we're gonna do a bicep curl, and I think I may have
He
seen
had
like he
been
wasn't quite getting it.
professionally picking things up and putting them down for his whole life, is what you're telling me.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and that's the whole point. Is he knew how to do it. He knew how to use as much muscle as possible to make it easier. If you're out, loading stuff onto a truck, you don't do a strict bicep curl to put it into
Oh,
the back
yeah.
of the pickup. You know how to, you use as much leverage you can, activate as much as muscle. You swing things around, you move them so that you could do that shit all day long. If you don't survive that work. And this guy was a survivor for decades. So we got into where I was trying to do a dumbbell concentration curl, back of his elbow backed up against the inside of his thigh, right? He's right there. I wanted to teach him a mind muscle connection using the biceps and just how to do this exercise, right? So I'm going to show this. He's leaned over, and I'm just like, all I want you to do is just bend at your elbow. Just bend the elbow, nothing else. And he's doing this.
Of course he is.
And I'm like, no, don't. Exactly.
Yeah.
He's doing an isometric, and he's leveraging the thing up, by moving his whole body around like that. It makes it a lot easier. I'm like, no, I want you to just move your elbow, not your upper body. And I grabbed him by the front and back of his shoulder, and I was trying to keep him.
Put him in a vice.
And he's throwing me around the gym. I'm like,
yeah.
But all that was programmed in, right?
Yep.
He learned how to do that. So that's someone who had learned how to not do what bodybuilders are trying to do, not work a muscle in isolation.
Yeah.
And there's some degree that I think is something that probably is somewhat innate in us. When we bend down to pick something up, some people just kind of bend at their back, but you squat. If in most countries where they're much more agile than we are and they spend time squatting, and that's probably what we had done in our evolutionary origins, you squat down to grab things, right? But you don't do a stiff-legged deadlift.
No.
Right? Or if there's something like at your heels, you don't do like a sissy squat, right? And squat down for it. Right? There's certain movement patterns that we develop as kids, et cetera, and they become ingrained. And bodybuilding is hacking around that to some degree.
Yeah.
By choosing exercises, by creating a mind muscle connection, blah, 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 to create that, to hack into that muscle and force it to grow in a way that it otherwise wouldn't. Those weak muscles would stay weak, and the relative proportion of size across a joint, the agonists and antagonists of knee extension, let's say, would be how they are because of your biomechanics and your neural programming and neuromechanical matching too. I think it probably is something that plays a role. That's a contentious topic, so I'll just leave that there.
Okay.
But anyway, so yeah, there's something to say for squeezing the muscle, I think. And there's some scientific evidence that suggests, without a direct study doing that, we've got the count study. It's kind of like we've got training, traditional training, heavy training, where you're not worried about that, and then you're just lightening the load and maintaining continuous tension. We looked at that research. We've got blood flow restriction, which creates much more metabolic stress. This is one of the reasons why people think metabolic or thought or think metabolic stress is associated. It creates a different activation strategy. Those type ones get loaded and activated in a different way. And then the gap would be training with the squeeze, and then we have training with no load and only the squeeze. So we
Mm.
have a continuum of evidence that sort of points towards a type 1 fiber specific hypertrophic effect. Interestingly enough, they didn't measure different fiber types in that count study, the no load study, but we have converging evidence points the direction that a great master's thesis for someone would be to train with the squeeze, with and without the squeeze, and maybe have a heavy condition and a light condition.
Yeah. So you can
Because we
get Nick
even
in on
know,
that study as one of your participants.
yeah, I think he's already
You might
pretty
not
close. We're
qualify.
not going to get much growth from him. But the thing too that I forgot to add, another piece. This would make a nice. Maybe I'll make this into a presentation sometime to give for folks because there's a lot of cool pieces of evidence here. But that mind muscle connection also goes away, or the ability to evoke that goes away when you get to about 80% of a 1 rep max.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you can the classic studies, a couple of them. You can tell people to do this bench press with a pec versus your triceps,
Yeah.
right? And when they have low loads, like 40, 50, 60% of one, they can do that. Lift it with your triceps. They do it more of a tricep oriented. So they
Yeah.
can switch the muscle that they're using. But when you get to 80% 1 rep max, they can't do that because it's so heavy. They don't have a choice. They have to bring in the other muscles.
That's a great point to, I think, bring up. And that's something where I'm seeing people have problems nowadays. I think
Mm,
that there are a lot of people that are hyper focused on trying to isolate the target muscle. And because of that, they aren't using the heavy loads that it can take to be able to get to,
yeah.
280 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that with clients where I see them saying like, well, I want to do this, twisting one arm pull down, and
Right.
and I think there is benefit to that, and they say, but if I do two arms at once, I can't feel it. I don't feel it anymore.
Yeah.
Is there still benefit to that exercise if you're not, quote unquote, feeling it the way you can feel it with lighter weight and optimal control and hard squeeze?
Mm,
Because I think
yeah.
the answer has already been in our squeeze versus just do the reps study. I know that's not the name of the study, but that's what I'm going
Yeah.
to call it for the
Yeah.
sake of this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, if someone is just it feels amazing with the one arm unilateral approach, and the bilateral approach just feels horrible, um, then one option would be just to not do them that way, right? The other option would be is to keep working on that mind muscle connection. The thing that makes me hesitant is just sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, and just stop doing bilateral exercises that have been really effective for many
Oh, I don't
people.
think anything was saying I wasn't trying to say stop,
Yeah.
but even like I can say I've seen people who say like, well, when I do stiff legs, for instance, if I, go up above a certain weight, where I can't do this like really good control, or
Mm-hmm.
squats, it's like it just everything takes over. I think personally that there's benefit to overloading the body in
Mm-hmm.
also doing both. Basically, let's do both.
That's where I was going with this
Okay.
too. That's where
Yeah.
I was agreeing with you. I wasn't. Yeah,
Okay.
you don't want to throw those out because one, you can learn how to do those. Maybe lighten the load slightly.
Yeah.
Um, there can be. I really think. Let's say you're trying to make that. Let's take that stiff legged deadlift example. You're trying to make that a hamstring action, and it becomes you just feel it in the glutes mainly,
Okay.
right? Um, well, then you're getting some glute activation there. Set, the way partial sets are now counted up in the research is you might call that a half set for the glutes, for
Oh,
instance.
okay.
So they all pressing movements become a half a set for triceps, even if they're supposed to be an
Huh.
overhead. So there's some stimulus that gets added in there potentially,
Yeah.
and that's one thing. Like for instance, with DC training in particular, that you can do is let's say you want to bring your triceps up, right? So you might in particular make sure you don't have flies as your chest movements, because you're maybe sacrifice a little for the chest, but you use pressing movements. So you get some tricep activation on your pressing movements for your shoulders and for your delts,
Yeah.
um, because you're getting more tricep involvement there. So the triceps are getting half sets maybe in those cases. So yeah, there's something to say for training the whole body. You're getting some training stimulus to those other muscles. And interestingly enough, if those muscles seem like they're taking over, get them stronger, so that those aren't loaded as much. It becomes
Mm.
relatively easier, and then it becomes a hamstring exercise again.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember Ron talking about this on an episode of It's Just Bodybuilding. Him and the way he phrased it was people saying like, well, I don't feel that, pendulum in where I want to feel it in my leg though,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. I don't feel that hack squat. Let's say the hack squat, because that's kind of more a front and back everything exercise. I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel it in the quad. And his thought was like, you don't have to. Your body, you're like your body has the intelligence to use all of these muscles together. And just because you're not feeling it in one specific spot doesn't mean that that spot isn't working. Like everything's
Yeah.
working in conjunction. You don't have to tell your body use the quad. And obviously we've talked about, yeah, there is benefit like on a bench press, visualizing using the chest, but whether you do or don't, that chest is firing in the bench press.
Yeah. And the thing too that if you do a set of 20, you're going to feel it in those last 10 reps because you've got more metabolic stress. You're going to have a different mind muscle connection than if you do a set of 8 on
Yeah.
something. You're not going to get like, oh my god, like the muscle's on fire. It's, feels like it's going to melt off my body because it's burning so badly.
Yeah.
When people are hyper focused on that, they might be having good loading in the muscle, and because they've got so much downward central drive, which needs to be there to move the heavy loads, they're not as able to pick up on that afferent information that's coming back from the muscles. So
Mm.
that happens with pain, for instance. This is called a gating phenomenon. I'm no expert, so someone correct me if I'm wrong, but um, the idea is that pain signals, afferent signals coming back to the brain, um, the gate is closed if you're sending descending information down. So
Huh.
the signal transduction coming back from muscle during exercise is reduced when you've got a central drive. It's interfered with in a certain way according to this gating idea. There's ideas a
Huh.
gate would be closed. So that they might be activating that muscle, and they just can't tell because they've got such a heavy load. They have so much descending drive. They're just not getting the same afferent information to let them know that it's being activated, and
That
they're
makes
not it's
sense.
not going to feel the same because there's not going to have the lactic acid and the other things that are going to give them the sense, okay, that muscle's going.
Yeah.
So
But
yeah, there's
2 days, the next day, you're definitely going to be sore. You know what I mean?
bingo. That's the thing, is like, okay, like I'm gonna try this, like give it a go, and let's say, I don't like the heavy stuff, I can't feel it, the muscle, blah blah blah. So like, give it a go, do your damnedest, focus on mind muscle connection, start the movement with the target muscle,
Yeah.
initiate the movement with that, do everything you possibly can, work on that mind muscle connection, see what happens soreness wise, and then give it some time to grow with that and see if you
Yeah.
start to see the improvements.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So there's, give it time. Don't just give up on it because you didn't get, an immediate sense in that set that it did what you wanted it to do.
Yeah. I feel like people have been, and I get it. It's kind of cool how like conscientious lifters are becoming and how
Mm-hmm.
self-aware they are. But I do think that we can take it too far, sometimes
Yeah.
and end up kind of missing, some really heavy ass, lightweight baby stuff that
Yeah.
we really could have used.
Well, you know what? I set up. This is one of the things I kind of incorporated into fortitude training intentionally.
Hmm.
Is that you've got the loading sets, you've got the muscle rounds, the pump sets. So we just compare the loading and the pump. The pump is when you're looking for that targeted mind muscle connection, creating the metabolic stress. You're doing things we kind of talked about here today. You want to sear the gains into the muscle, right? So to speak. Um, And it's isolated. You don't have so much central drive involved. You're not gonna get done with those sets and be like, oh my god, I just want to lie on the. Well, maybe you will with legs sometimes, but it's not the same central nervous system type of holy shit. I feel like I just ran into a brick wall 100 times in a row.
Yeah.
Um, those are the training sessions when you do that, right? And you cultivate your mind muscle connection, and you check that box, just like we talked about checking the box with the no relaxation training being type 1 fiber hypertrophic specific, so to speak. And then when it comes to loading sets, that's when you go to town and you make gravity your bitch,
Yeah.
right? And you move the big weights, the exercises that you know work for you, and you do your best to have a good mind muscle connection. You do all those sorts of things, but you're not expecting necessarily to get this great pump that's isolated just to the muscle you wanted to target.
Right.
Those would tend to be more compound exercises anyway. Just that, well, some of them are isolated, some are the compound, but those are your big, your big extra squats, deadlifts, incline presses, dips, those sorts of things
Yeah.
that you wouldn't do for the pump sets necessarily. So some people, I think, just psychologically say, okay, I got my pump sets, those are in place. I'm doing that. I've got a good mind muscle connection, checking that box. But I also know that if I get brutally strong on these exercises and I double my 50% increases in my strength on those over the next 3 years, it's going to show up in my physique
Yeah.
because these are the right exercises for me. And I know this. And mind muscle connection, whatever, I'm moving this weight. There's still an internal focus, right? You're not just like squatting and 3 inches and just bending at the hip, right? You're still squatting with good execution.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
but you're not like the efficacy of whether or not you had a good set or that workout was as good as you'd hoped it would be is not going to be in how you felt the muscle work during those sets per se. It's going to be whether you check the boxes in terms of execution, range of motion, blah blah blah, and the logbook got its ass whooped.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
that's
know
the
what,
thing.
Scott? So many times I think when people talk about science in fitness and bodybuilding, they use it as a weapon to say that this is what you must do, or this is a terrible idea. You should never do this. You use science to say that it really all works. Like, do it all. You really do. You say
Yeah,
that you use science to say that, like, well, sometimes this is great and sometimes the opposite is great. That's
yeah,
your. I think that sometimes confuses our listeners because they want to walk away with that black and white answer that, oh, thank God Scott's here with science. He can tell us
right,
exactly the one thing that we should be doing and the other things that we shouldn't. But I'm
right,
walking away from this conversation hearing that you should definitely still do both: squeeze the muscle, use good control, and also use heavy weight that you may not feel the squeeze, may not be able to feel the squeeze in as much, and rely on that natural intuition of the muscle. You know what I mean? That it knows what to
hmm,
do when you're using it.
yeah. I mean, should's kind of a four-letter word, even though there's more than four letters in it. But I mean, another way you do this is figure. This is my big thing. Figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
Give it a go. Try. Give yourself 6 months or a year where you do the squeeze, right? Or you just do higher rep stuff, right? Or the other way around. Everything's 6 to 8 reps. Even like isolation movements, you can do them that way,
Yeah.
right?
I
Um,
think even if you only leaned
and
into one, you would probably still get some sort of growth, right? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, it might not be the ultimate answer, but you'll be able to isolate it. Kind of like if you're breaking down gear and you just try one compound at a time. You know what I
hmm,
mean?
yeah. Figure it out for you. Like the study, Carniera study I mentioned with the postmenopausal women. Like some of them,
Yeah.
the one of the takeaways from there is that high reps was probably a better approach for muscle size for some of those women, and low reps was probably a better approach. And it could be a whole bunch of reasons because they don't pain, ability to handle pain. They like to feel the
Uh,
pump. It could be, there's a number of different reasons. It could be purely what stimulates muscle growth in their muscles. Um, could
so the
be
question to our
whether they,
listener is, which menopausal woman are you?
yeah, right. Um, I mean, it could be even something like you train higher reps and you're like, I'm just wrecked. I'm just going to go home and take a nap, and they don't eat for 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that.
Right. Or they do the other way and they're like, oh, this is great. And like, I think I'm going to grab some food, or I just to go right to the cafeteria or whatever. So there's a number of different things, but you got to try those things. What I tried to do with fortitude training is try to check all the boxes, with a daily undulating periodization scheme where you're doing different set types that are going to have potentially evoke fiber hypertrophy somewhat in a specific fashion, what have you. And then you just get good at all of those
Yeah.
and they coordinate with one another. But you can periodize, which has been done for years, and just go with heavy and then light, or light then heavy, and say, okay, the heavy stuff doesn't work for me, or go with reps in reserve, see if that works, and try to do more volume.
That was another thing Nick was talking about. Nick's doing all, to a degree, reps in reserve now, and he said that
Mm-hmm.
he's loving it. Like it's been great for him. And when we talked about it on the podcast, the interview we just did with him recently, he had said that what did he say? He said that if he could go back, because the big question is, well, Nick, that's not the way you grew this muscle. What
Right.
did it take to do that? And he said, hey, if I could go back, I would do that from the start. I
Uh
don't
huh.
feel as beat up, and I feel like I'm
Yeah.
getting just as good of a, overall activation, but he's a lot fresher feeling now day to day, very
Mm-hmm.
much more recovered than he had been in the
Mm-hmm.
past. So I would say this too, that if you do pick one or the other, lightweight, lighter weight with all squeezing that constant and I love constant tension overall. Weider constant tension principle 103.
Right.
I love that stuff. And I also love like really heavyweight, and I love heavyweight with constant tension. There's a balance in there too, where if it's not working for you, if you did do extremely heavy stuff and that stuff wrecks you, well, maybe you can still do extremely heavy stuff, but maybe tailor it a little bit more so that you can listen to your body and not get absolutely wrecked from it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Auto regulate.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think too with Nick. Then we talked about this. This was one of the previous podcasts here recently. Is that he trained to failure for so many years.
yeah.
Now his reps in reserve, he can adequately judge that because he's got
Totally different.
years and years, as opposed to someone who's a year and a half in and they're trying to do that, and their reps in reserve is actually, they think they're 2 and they're actually 7,
Yeah,
and they never really learn to push themselves. Um, and I always I still think we don't see this in the literature because there's an internal governor, but there's, I think, an inverted U dose response. And Nick may have been training, doing more, and feeling wrecked than was optimal for him at some point in
yeah,
time. He's still making progress, but he wasn't making optimal progress. His progress could have been better, or at least now for sure, his progress would be nil or be minimal or less than it currently is, as he's apparently seeing. And he's optimizing because he trained so hard anyway by
yeah.
having more reps in reserve, getting in more volume, and he still creates. He's obviously Nick's got pretty good genetics, I think, for bodybuilding. He also dots every I and crosses every T. I mean, that's the thing that's really, I think, underestimated, undervalued, is that guy is not missing a single beat as
Yeah,
far as everything he does. Everything
yeah,
he does is on. But that being said, too, he has his personal muscle genetic code is such that resistance exercise creates hypertrophy. Like he puts that in. It's like gas to a fire, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, so it's going to happen. And then someone else, maybe who's less genetically gifted in that sense, they may need to cultivate the signal more with more sets taken to failure in order to
uh-huh,
get a signal whatsoever. But then that means that they can't do as many sets because you can't recover from as many sets when you're training to failure all the time.
yeah,
And that just means that they're going to be limited in muscle growth, which you knew from the fact that they had to train to failure. There's so many top pros. Like, there's so many examples of guys that you can watch their training and you don't see a single video where they look like the bar is speed isn't slowing at all,
right,
and they're monsters. Some of that's PEDs, but there's tons of guys that are natural that just look ridiculous, and you're like, this guy's juiced to the gills, and they're not. They're just genetic phenoms,
yeah,
right? And they don't they're not in there training until they're throwing up and going crazy and training like absolute idiots because they add in the load and the training and it's reasonably hard and the muscle just grows.
Yeah.
So that's just that genetic gift. So that's I think we talked about this with Brandon Curry years
Hmm.
ago. You know, that the guys in the Middle East who can hang with that high volume protocol that everyone pretty much underwent were the ones that stuck around. If you didn't have those genetics, you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So the guys who can do set after set after set after set and still get a stimulus from each of those sets, even if they're 1 or 2 reps shy of reserve, and then still recover from all of those sets, they've got at least 2 genetic components going for them. One, they don't have to go to absolute failure in order to create a stimulus for those sets.
Yeah.
This is my theory, my kind of the way this is my perspective on things. And then they can add together a lot of those sets and still recover from it.
Right.
So they're responsive to a stimulus that might not be responsive for some people. Might not be a stimulus that creates new muscle growth, because it wouldn't be those last few reps, the reps in reserve, that just doesn't work. Jordan, I mentioned Jordan in another podcast. Actually, it's probably going to be a shitstorm here, but there was a story that got posted from a podcast I did.
I saw
Um,
the clip.
yeah,
It was a
yeah,
really great clip too.
yeah. He's putting
Yeah.
together really good clips.
Where
But
you
Jordan
were
tried.
saying, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he tried reps in reserve training. He had a I think Steve Hall's podcast, Revive Stronger podcast. I think is where he had a conversation with Mike Israetel, if I remember correctly, and Mike was explaining the reps in reserve idea and how it works, and Jordan's like, I'll do whatever it takes, I'll give it a go, and he tried it, and it didn't work out for him, and I think he did it exactly the way he should have, and the way he thought he should have. He
Right.
didn't like try to sneak in reps to sets to failure or whatever.
He wanted to give it a fair shake.
He gave it a fair shake, and it didn't work for him, right? So and I would say I would say Jordan and Nick's muscle mass is on a equivalent level.
Sure.
Jordan's not going to beat Nick on stage, but Jordan's as highly muscular as pretty much anyone
Yeah.
in the world.
That's not the conversation, right?
Yeah, right. But Jordan was someone that and based on that that short journey into reps and reserve training, didn't get the stimulus with all the other parameters he had in place to allow him to continue to progress. He's someone, because he has really good genetics, but he doesn't maybe have the elite genetics that would put him in the top 5 on the Olympia stage, where he can get away with, so to speak, or he can get an effective stimulus training with anything other than the way he trains, which is
Yeah.
all out, balls to the wall.
You know,
I'm going to see God, shake his hand, and make him bow before me before I come back down to earth after the set.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because when I've tried to use him as an example on Blood, Sweat, and Gear, Skip and Andrew shut me down hard and say, well, Jordan is the absolute elite. And I don't, but I think that it's kind of like Dusty. You know, Dusty said,
Yeah.
hey, listen, the way I've trained my back is what I've had to do to grow my back, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the response to that was, well, did he try the other way? And well, Jordan did. He's a great example then of
Yeah.
maybe not being as elite as, you know, maybe somebody else. There's levels of elite, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
and one other thing, just this thought came to my mind. That conversation we had with Brandon Curry was so enlightening. I wonder if he'd be interested in coming on with us now and talking about how his training has changed. I believe he's probably, if he's doing the Masters Olympia, I don't know if he is. Months ago they were talking
Mm-hmm.
about that being a potential show that he might do. And I mean, God, if I'd take the check, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? If
Yeah.
he's ready for it. But I'd be curious to talk to him now, because it's been probably 5 years, 6 years since we talked to him about that. I wonder
Mm-hmm.
how his training has changed, you know, with a little bit more age, because at that point, man, it was just take the governor off and do as many sets as you can, and
Mm-hmm.
he's going to keep getting better. Is it
Yeah.
still that way, or has it evolved, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think he's back in Tennessee
Yeah.
year round.
Yep.
So he's not going overseas anymore. It's not with his coach that he had then. So,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Well, I don't, I actually met him. I talked to him. I went to his gym when I was in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And worked out at, he owns, maybe he owns a number of them now, but he had at least one location for his gym.
Yeah. I know he has the one Carbon
so-
Culture there. Yeah.
Yeah, Carbon Culture. So maybe, maybe I could contact him and see. He probably doesn't answer his Instagram because he's getting so much stuff.
I'll reach out to him. He'll
Okay,
probably get
okay.
back to me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But this interesting, like this kind of Nick and Jordan comparison. there's there's no absolutes in terms of what is best going to produce muscle growth for
Yeah.
anyone, right? And I mentioned this was on that, probably another clip will come out. The one did already from that other podcast. And that was one thing I thought about. I mentioned in a message to you this morning is that if we look across the landscape of what creates muscle growth, we've got compensatory hypertrophy. We've got these stretch overload models with the quails where they hang the weight off their wings. Um, when we got a small sliver of potential stimuli that produce muscle growth is resistance exercise. And we've got high rep, we've got low rep, we've got continuous tension, we've got no worry about that. And there's so much more. Sometimes we miss the forest for the trees, so to speak, and that there's so many other things that can produce massive increases in muscle size that are very, very different. The features are very, very different than resistance exercise,
Huh,
where
okay.
I mean, you're spending like whatever the muscles under tension for 10 minutes, maybe. You do 15 sets and they're 45 seconds
Yeah.
or what have you. It's not that much time really. And these other like the stretch overload model, again, that's birds, not mammals, but um, it's continuous all day long. Or the compensatory, they're walking around, but it's just walking, but that's an overload of sorts. So if you think about those things being stimuli that do produce muscle growth, muscle fiber size, and hyperplasia too,
Hmm.
um, and then you think, well, it's no surprise. It's not, if you look like this is the broad scheme of things. If we narrow in on resistance exercise, we got someone who does more sets with less intensity or less intensity of effort,
Yeah.
like Nick with reps reserve and seems to get better results. Someone else is more towards go to failure. Like those are so close together, really.
Yeah. In
These
the
are two
scheme of
trees that grow
all
up
the
right next to one
things.
another. And
Yeah.
it's like to say this tree's better than that tree. It's like, no, there's like, look at the whole forest. Like there's trees that are they're growing in all sorts of different kinds of soil. They've got different amount of sunlight,
Yeah.
different amount of water coming through, and they're all growing. They're all examples of muscle hypertrophy,
There's trees that never
right?
lifted a weight in their life and they look better than some guys that have, you know?
Yeah, there's no weightlifting models of muscle hypertrophy, and there's also so that if you think of it from that perspective, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's the tension that's the most important thing,
Huh.
and then I think progressive overload plays a role. But that's the thing too, is, and you've mentioned this with execution on your chest pressing movements. That's the one example that we brought up, is that a way to create overload that wouldn't manifest as an outward progression of weight would be to improve your execution, improve your
Yeah.
mind muscle connection, and have co-contractions or be activating that muscle with a mind muscle type of way of doing this. So it's producing force during those sets that wouldn't necessarily manifest in moving a heavier weight for more reps, because you're doing like what they did in the count study where you're just flexing the muscle. So that is a way that you could get better with a better mind muscle connection and figure out, and then in that way have an overload that happens that isn't manifested in the logbook per se.
Yeah.
But then I think this is where things kind of fit together in the grand scheme of, is that if you do then have hypertrophy that would manifest as ability to lift a heavier weight for more reps, and you move to that mode of training where you're logbook focused, still with an internal focus on making sure you're activating the right muscles, but you simply progress, then the overload that created with that internal focus on squeezing the muscle, etc., that is producing hypertrophy, which eventually manifests when you go and test the performance capabilities of the muscle by training, when you're counting your reps and you're micro loading the bar and those sorts of things to see if you're actually getting stronger and your performance is improving in the gym. So the two interact with one another
Yeah.
in some really kind of cool ways. So yeah, there's lots of ways to skin the cat.
Well, we got through one question today. That's the
Yes, we
one
did.
topic. We had like
Yeah.
5 of them, but that means that we have a bunch more stuff then for next time too.
Yeah, for sure. This
That'd be
was fun,
good.
man.
Guys, go to byobbcoach.com to check out Scott's book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. I just did an episode with Kuba about planning your year. and it made me think about your book. And he mentioned your book too, and he pulled it out and he was like, "You guys need to get a copy of this."
Oh, cool.
But we talked about setting up your year. If you've got, say 45 weeks right now before the show, you could do a whole lot of nothing with that, or you could plan that out and set yourself up. How many weeks are we going to, let's work backward, how many weeks are we going to need to diet? How much time does this give us to grow? What kind of a health phase do we maybe need to drop in there in the middle? And how do we adjust our training? How do we adjust our nutrition? And how do we set expectations for ourselves? What can we reach? And that reminds me a lot of a whole section of your book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. So I strongly suggest that all you guys check it out. And if you go to the link in the description, you can get it from Scott directly off eBay, and he will sign it for you. Get the hardcover that way. Or you just get the, yeah, you gonna say something?
I think those might be sold out. I'll have to go and look.
Oh, you might have sold those out.
I
Okay.
think I might have. Yeah, I'm not sure. But
Okay.
yeah, so if someone can't find them, then they're maybe sold out. But I think
But
it's
you can still
out.
get the hardcover. If not, I'll put the
Oh,
other
yeah.
link in then if that's the case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you can, of course, get the ebook from byobbcoach.com. And that's also where you can go to get the Fortitude Training ebook for like $20, guys. It's literally nothing. And even if you're not ready to do it now, you can support Scott by buying the ebook, save it, read it later. It's fun to understand and learn different training principles and ideas. So you can do that. And of course, supplementsource.ca for Canadians, truenutrition.com, code THINK for 10% off. If you're pumped up to do some training after listening to this episode, then you're going to need a lot more protein. Go to truenutrition.com to get that, as well as your intra-workout, your creatine, and everything else. And of course, Patreon. Thank you guys for Patreon. You guys are freaking awesome. We'll definitely get to some Patreon stuff here in the future. And for another episode here, Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson and Scott McNally, guys, we'll see you soon. Thank you, Scott, as always.
You're welcome, brother.